Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of Kopi Chats with me, your host Wei Lin, where we talk about all the news of the day, the noteworthy, the remarkable, the sometimes just the plain infuriating. But always, I want to leave you feeling good after each episode. So I've prepared a great selection of things to talk about today to entertain, educate, edify you. And let's begin. Did you know that President Zelensky is really popular now? I think everybody knows that. And there are v- global calls for President Zelensky to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. This actually a group of European politicians who are leading it. It says here, even though the deadline has passed, they requested a deadline be extended so that President Zelensky of Ukraine can be nominated and included for consideration for this year's award. And this is very recent. This was just reported 2 days ago, as you can see over here. Now, you would think, oh, wow, he's clearly brave man working hard to save his country, fight off a foreign invader. But this is 2022, and you can't take things at face value anymore. You can't. You just can't. Look at this. 16 hours ago, Zelensky announces ban on 11 Ukrainian political parties. What? So the guy who is promoting peace around the world thinks that, in part, peace is brought about by crushing your opponents, banning them from the public forum to compete with you in the political arena. I think I think that was the most short-lived Nobel Peace Prize nomination in history, isn't it? You're nominated, and then within a day, 24 hours, one news cycle, done. It's over. You're out of contention now. So that happened. I hope that amused you. Now moving on to something that we've all forgotten about. COVID deaths. China reports COVID deaths for the first time since 2021. This was a couple of days ago. Actually, the numbers don't really matter because it's so minuscule. It's just two in a place called Jilin. Now, you think, wow, two. That sounds rather insane, right? It's so tiny, but the response. If you've been reading news, just absorbing it incidentally, you'll seem to get the impression that there's a big response in China to coronavirus. Yes, that's exactly true. And there's commentary here on South China Morning Post saying China's clinging to the zero tolerance approach, right, that relies on stringent lockdowns, mass testing, and quarantine. But the cost is really high. Yes, and governments are struggling to balance the debt control with the virus prevention measures. Look at that. The outbreak is currently the biggest macroeconomic event in China, said a Chinese investment bank. And yes, it's really expensive and really difficult to maintain. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said the zero COVID policy will be fine-tuned to minimize disruptions to the economy, but there are no signs of it being abandoned. So it continues. And to give you a sense of how it's being received, take a look at this. Hong Kong is to spruce up conditions at new isolation facilities after complaints about the poor quarantine experience. Look at this. So China has built a lot of these kinds of quarantine camps, which look like essentially small containers that are converted to rooms, and you will have people isolate themselves inside. You see people milling about outside, but actually those are likely staff. You're not allowed to exit, if I'm not mistaken. Here, team has adapted the feedback from residents in the Qingyi facility. And yeah, it looks like they're doing a really beefing up or upgrading the experience here. Officials have pledged to improve conditions, including offering best-selling books and TV dramas. Yes, TV dramas, right? After being flooded with complaints from the public. They also hired former tourist guides and fitness coaches as housekeeping assistants to operate hotline services. Now that's rather funny. That's really cute. I wonder how that works, right? You call in and then you ask for a tour guide? No, that doesn't make any sense. Fitness coaches, well, they maybe will tell you, okay, do some. This is your fitness program, 5-day fitness. Oh no, 21 days. I think 21 days is the duration of the quarantine. In some instances, 14 to 21, I would believe. Yeah. So you think, oh, okay, wow, doesn't look so bad. Doesn't look so bad. But people have been complaining, and now the authorities are responding to that. Now, isn't it remarkable that when you think about the quarantine experience, the quarantine measures implemented in many places, probably in your own city or own country, it'll often involve hotels, right? Very often. At least that's how they started off. But in China, it seems that in Hong Kong, as well as in China, a lot of these containers are being used. I've seen listings on Alibaba for exactly these sort of containers, and I actually found a tweet thread collecting a bunch of videos just to get a glimpse of how these quarantine facilities look like. Let me show you. Look at that. Looks like this is in some kind of field at a school. You see that there are bleachers. There's a terrace, terraced bleachers in the background. Yeah. And elsewhere, you can see this one. The designs may vary a little, right? So there will be, a simple bed, a simple toilet, mineral water, and a really small. This is nothing like the Hong Kong one, right? There's nothing like the Hong Kong one, but you can see that there is a lot of variety in the experience that people put up with. And this is food delivery. At least in one place, there'll be food delivery that is done very efficiently, I might add, but I'll reckon that it isn't very appetizing. Look at that. Plain white rice, some steamed vegetables, maybe pickled vegetables, and then a plain vegetable broth. That looks very unappetizing. Here's a little longer video. This one looks like it's within a larger structure, and looks like it looks pretty clean. The subtitles are someone complaining about the the COVID tracing app not being recognized. This is a funny one. You'll have to describe it. Someone is just going out and having a laugh, like going out and then making funny noises, making ape noises to his neighbors, and they respond. This video claims to be, showing a kid locked up without their parents. I don't know if that's true, so I don't want to say if it's true or not. But the place does look clean, very spacious. That's what you see. So there are a lot of these, and I don't know where these are specifically, but it does appear to be, they do look like they could be in China, and we know from Hong Kong that these sorts of venues are built and constructed, and they are likely all over China, and that's how they do it over there. If I'm not mistaken, regular Chinese have to pay to stay there as well. So if the government decides that you have to go quarantine, they don't pay for it. You have to pay for your own quarantine. So this is a very difficult, seems like a very difficult situation for China, because you have to maintain, you have to construct and maintain these large facilities, even with people paying their way. I don't think it's a profit generating enterprise. I mean, who knows, right? Because it may not be entirely above board, but it is, difficult to coordinate, and it has a lot of costs in terms of economics and dissatisfaction. I don't see how they can continue doing it for a long time. But now you also have the inside look at this, and I gotta say, it doesn't look great. I heard that it's likely that China's COVID peak is still ahead of them, and it looks perfectly reasonable to say so, because the spread has been suppressed in very deliberately and very aggressively. So if we think, if we accept that Omicron is so virulent that it will spread, there's just no way to really stamp that out, then what's happening in China may just continue for a very long time. Now, either they will soon get a huge outbreak, and that creates maybe more natural immunity to complement the vaccination that people already have. But of course, that comes with casualties, or else they will have to continue in this manner, with periodic lockdowns here and there that will not be acceptable, on a long enough time period. It's just really painful. So there's no good way out for China, as I see it. Okay, moving on. Here's a nice piece of news. Cheer you up. Check it out. Singaporean teen raises funds for Ukraine by teaching chess. On the right is Mr. Go Zihan and his friend Dmitry Gerasimov of Ukraine. When 13-year-old Mr. Go heard about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he thought of his former coach and decided to raise funds to help Ukraine. And he did. And let's see, it actually says here, he aims to raise at least $6,000 by, as of 3 days ago, he had raised more than $4,000, which is great. Here, his fundraising campaign has a link down here in this article. I will share the article in the show notes, in the description. Click there, check it out. I'll highlight it so that you know where it is, and then if you feel like you're donating, please go ahead. It's for a good cause. Now, I highlight this because there's a little bit of a contrast here. Look, the Singapore Foreign Minister, Mr. Vivian Balakrishnan, had visited the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian territories, and given nearly $1 million Singapore dollars to the Palestinian authorities to fight COVID-19. It was just days ago that Mr. Balakrishnan was still, making public statements about the sanctions and the on Russia, why they're necessary, why Singapore is doing what it's doing. Then later on, when I saw the previous article about Mr. Go Zihan, 13-year-old Mr. Go Zihan raising money for Ukraine, it struck me that, why wasn't there a donation drive, fundraising campaign for Ukraine, right? Because I suppose it would be a really nice gesture to go along, not just to say we want to punish Russia for the decisions of our president, but also we want to alleviate the suffering of the victims here. It feels like a missed opportunity is the way I would say it. There seems to be a lot of missed opportunities lately. I feel like almost every video that I make, I talk about some kind of missed opportunity. Now, does this not feel like another one? Here you have 13-year-old Mr. Go Zihan raising money for Ukraine. But the adults neglected to do so, even though they had remembered very clearly to punish Russia. So that feels like a shame, really. Okay, moving on to the next topic, and this is the big one. The Straits Times of Singapore, Singapore's #1 newspaper, has a special called Rise of Pro-China Singaporeans and What It Means for Singapore. Now, if you are in Singapore or you have spent time in Singapore, or you have relatives and friends who live in Singapore, you may have noticed that they're quite pro-China over here. Like, people over here are pretty pro-China. There are people who see it as their mission to enlighten the masses, to take them out of their pro-West indoctrination. According to a Pew Research Center survey, Mr. Chan, which is the man in the anecdote above, favorable view of China is shared by 64% of Singaporeans. Singaporeans are the only ones who view China more positively than the US. In my understanding, it is now the majority of people in the US do not view China positively anymore. Now, if I opened up this link, and it says, it goes to here, reporting that Singaporeans have more positive views in China than most people in other advanced economies who continue to view China in a broadly negative light. The US has since, images of both the US and China were near historic lows last year. The US has seen a turnaround in public opinion, while most continue to see China unfavorably. And Singapore is the rare exception to that by viewing China in a better light than the US, and to prefer stronger economic ties with China over the US. They also gave China top marks for pandemic handling and have high confidence in the Chinese President Xi Jinping. So, what are we to think about this? Well, this puts Singapore at a little at odds with her neighbors. Look at this. In the Asia Pacific region, the median, so let's just say the typical person, typically 73% see China in a negative light. Japan has the most negative views, with roughly 90% seeing China negatively. 2/3 or more in Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, and New Zealand. And it seems that, the US is now viewed more positively with the Biden administration. So, seems like Singapore has a very unique situation going on here. Highly pro-China and eager to have more economic ties with China as compared to the United States. And check this out. Older adults tend to be more critical of China and to prefer America than younger adults, except in Singapore, where presumably older adults are more favorable towards China and younger adults more critical of China. Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea, that's where the trend takes place. So Singaporeans, Taiwanese, and South Koreans, the older folk prefer China, and the younger folk less so. Ethnic and national identities also found to play a role in attitudes. 72% of Chinese Singaporeans favor China, compared to 45% of Malay Singaporeans, 52% of Indian Singaporeans. So that genuinely was pretty interesting. And if you, there's a little bit more here. Oh yeah, this is just more of the same, I would say. Yes. So this has been reported multiple times on the Straits Times, Singapore's number one news outlet. So you can see here, favorability rating. Most are very unfavorable. Now, there was one particular thing that was very interesting, which only popped up once. There was a French think tank that says Singapore is particularly vulnerable to Chinese influence operations, yet resilient. What does that mean? Well, let's take a quick look, shall we? There was a study by the Institute for Strategic Research at France's Military College. So they've got to be pretty serious, right? A military institute over there. They observed that Singapore is able to resist and defend against Chinese influence skillfully. Interesting. Singapore has several characteristics that make it a particularly vulnerable target and at the same time particularly resilient. So let's see. The Chinese embassy in France slammed the report. Unsurprisingly. The chapter on Singapore noted that its primary vulnerability was the very nature of its multi-ethnic and intercommunal society, both an asset and a lever that can be used. Yes, of course. I mean, because Singapore is predominantly Chinese, and it seems that in Singapore, Singapore cannot afford to be arrogant and alien Chinese. Yes, and there is this feeling that Chinese people should be favorable to China, because they are also Chinese. I find that a little bit racist, but it's just me, because I have absolutely no, I'm Malaysian and I live in Singapore. I love both of these countries. I don't really have much of a connection to China. I like it, but I don't feel a reason to support the government of China, right? The French report goes on to say that Singapore lacks a strong leader now, and the current prime minister underestimates the importance of ties with Beijing, is too close to the U.S. Well. Let's see. Sorry. This is the main narrative conveyed by Beijing's influence operation, saying that the current prime minister underestimates the importance of ties with Beijing. Yeah, I would reckon that that's what Beijing would say. Yeah, Beijing says that Singapore is too close to the U.S. And that Singapore should not get involved in the South China Sea debate. Interesting that the French Military College has done a pretty reasonable analysis, I would say. Let's see. It is estimated at least 20,000 Chinese are naturalized as citizens each year. And this is described in the report as a way of maintaining Chinese majority, with the lowest birth rate. Yes, the Chinese in Singapore have a very low birth rate, and this inflow maintains a ratio of ethnicities in Singapore. But yes, of course, that is an additional vector of influence, according to the French. So this is definitely a big problem for Singapore. It's just one report, but I think if you've been watching my videos, you'll notice that I've been talking a lot about Singapore, the Singapore news's emphasis on recognizing fake news, being more objective, being more challenging conspiracy theories, recognizing when you're being propagandized too. I've spoken about that so much. I think if anybody who watches more than one of my videos will know that. And you can see that there are many issues of great concern for Singapore. And this report conveniently summarizes them here. See, in 2016, the Singapore Army's armored personnel carriers were impounded in Hong Kong on the way back from Taiwan, from military exercise in Taiwan. There was no solid reason given for that. It was just, in my opinion, a slap in the face for the Singapore government. And then in 2017, the Singapore government actually expelled the China-born academic Professor Huang Jing for trying to influence Singapore officials. So the way that it was described was very, it smelled a bit off, that there was definitely it felt like there were some key points that were not communicated in the news, which I can understand because, these can be pretty sensitive. What it said was that, so Professor Huang Jing was, passing around privileged information, he would claim, and then this information was designed to influence decision makers in Singapore, which I think, well, that's pretty obvious, right? Because why does anybody share their opinion? Even myself, it is of course with the hope that maybe this will influence some people, maybe they will come to see things in my way, or maybe they'll consider it. So I think everybody does that. It's not a surprise but there must have been some very unfavorable things there. That is, perhaps the information was false, or perhaps the information turned out to be leading too strongly in a particular direction. Yeah, and then I'll move on from there. I'm just really speculating. I don't know a thing about that, like why it was done. Here, this handsome young man here was detained for being a paid Chinese spy. Yeah, he was. So, again, going back to the French report, points out that this saga, the one about the armored personnel carriers, led to online disinformation and influence campaigns, telling Singaporeans that they must stay in their place. The think tank also suggested that there was a hack in 2018 of the Singapore Ministry of Health, claiming that this was a response to the case of Professor Huang and intended to discover compromising information about the Prime Minister. So at the time that it was reported in 2018, no parties claimed responsibility, and the Singapore media, as I recall, did not point fingers at anybody saying who was responsible for the hack. And so this is actually the first time for me as well to see that this French report is claiming that, oh, it's probably done by the Chinese, and it was probably to find some compromising information about Prime Minister, to retaliate for the expulsion of Professor Huang. At the time that Professor Huang was expelled, the Singapore government, the media, was also very, very careful not to point fingers and say, oh, we are expelling him because of him, say, advocating for China. No, they left it ambiguous because Professor Huang is a US citizen, but his expertise is China. And they left it ambiguous, what was the offending matter that led to his expulsion. Now, what does all this tell you? I think actually the totality of it, right, if you sum it all up, starting with these several articles, point out that Singapore is very, very concerned about Chinese influence. The US, you already know, 64% allegedly. Who knows the real number? But if you know anyone in Singapore and you speak to them and you know them well enough and you ask them privately, there's a high chance that they'll tell you, yeah, they know somebody who is a strong advocate. And I know how this works. There are a lot of WhatsApp messages being forwarded around, many photos, some videos presenting the viewpoint of China, advocating for China, talking about the great things China does, and also criticisms, very, very strong criticisms of the United States in everything. And that is outright propaganda. I think there's no question about it. Singapore has passed some laws against fake news, dissemination of fake news, and as you know, expelled Professor Huang. But I think this is not a fair fight, because as you saw with the surveys, the damage is already done. The pro-Chinese attitudes are entrenched, and my understanding is that the propagandistic WhatsApp messages are still being forwarded around. They're still being circulating around, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of that. So this poison is circulating. And if you recall, there was this Chinese tennis player called Peng Shuai, this lady who had accused a Chinese official of rape. Later, she retracted it, and then she did her first interview to a foreign news outlet that's non-Chinese, was to Singapore's Chinese paper 联合早报. So the first foreign interview was to a Singaporean outlet. And why would that be the case, right? If you are cynical, which I am a little bit here, you would think, well, if you're going to take a risk and have her talk to foreign media, you would start with one that's very, very friendly to you. One which you might say you even have some control over. We don't know how much control, but suffice to say, it's the least risky option, right? If you're a Chinese authorities trying to manage this story. That's what you do. And they ended up choosing the 联合早报. And what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that they probably feel they have the most influence there. So, what does that tell you? Singapore's in a very tough spot with regards to Chinese influence. Perhaps more so than the other countries in Southeast Asia, because they don't speak as much Chinese, and their Chinese populations are not anywhere near as large. So I reckon that the other Southeast Asian countries are probably observing what happens in Singapore quite closely, and if they're aware of the struggles that Singapore is having with Chinese information operations, they're probably gonna get pretty nervous. There is a level of interference, or another way to say it would be, there's a percentage of pro-China sentiment where you may not have a country anymore. And I mean that entirely seriously. There's a percentage of pro-China sentiment where a political candidate can win by running on a pro-China platform. On all other issues, just hypothetically speaking, this candidate could be on the same page or differ in some small ways with other viable candidates. So with the assumption that it's a viable candidate, of course. And then all things being equal, if someone is aligned with their supporters on something so emotive, so deeply emotional as this question of support for China, they could win, couldn't they? Tell me why I'm wrong in the comments. I'll read it. Is it close? Are we close to that point though? I think that's a question worth asking, because we are where we are today, and nobody wants to be here, but yet this is the reality. So we have 64% of Chinese Singaporeans having strong pro-China sentiments, and you have no way of blocking the indoctrination they receive by WhatsApp. What can you do? Then there's also the question of, why are other countries mostly anti-China while Singapore is pro-China? Isn't that odd? So the study was looking at similarly developed countries. And among developed nations, well, that is the case. And why is that so? I don't really know. I think this is a question we might look into in subsequent episodes. I asked a few simple questions here. Is the Singapore press pro-China? I wouldn't say especially. But if we ask, are other countries' media somewhat anti-China? I would say that's rather more likely. I understand that in South Korea, they just had their presidential elections, and the winning candidate is somewhat anti-China. In Japan, the report already stated that Japan is the most anti-China country among those surveyed. In the United States, I understand that more than half the public feels negatively towards China today. And it seems to be the case, I don't know what the other countries surveyed are, but this is a French study. I presume that European countries are involved as well. Perhaps we'll do a deeper dive into this study in subsequent episodes. So it's possible that, the press have a large role to play. And Singapore has this unique situation where traditionally the Singapore press has not been very assertive, right? Not very assertive, not very proactive. And that might have played a part in allowing, unfortunately, Chinese influence to seep in. But we also don't have an answer to this question of, do other countries suffer as much Chinese WhatsApp propaganda? Well, we have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. I know that there is Chinese WhatsApp propaganda in Bahasa Indonesia. I've seen it. I've not seen it in Malaysia, but I reckon that there's similar stuff going on in Malay, although I've not seen it. But even so, with the very low Chinese population in the Malaysia and Indonesia, it's easy to think that, well, no matter how much support from ethnic Chinese that China gets, they have a large obstacle to overcome with any other ethnicity, which I think is kind of borne out even in the Singapore example. So what is the percentage? Coming back to your original question, what is the percentage that which you don't really have your own country? If somebody maybe that's the threshold where pro-China candidate gets elected, and then subsequently decisions made, for the country will favor China. Have we seen that in real life? I can't think of anything right now. I think the technical term for that would be like capture, right? To capture a regime. Maybe not by China, but certainly one could make the argument that the Ukraine is one such country that's undergone capture. That is, they're extremely friendly to NATO, where they weren't before. They're extremely close to the United States, where many decades ago they weren't before. All this has taken place in the past few decades. One could argue that this kind of thing does in fact happen, but Singapore is entirely different from Ukraine, of course. Where the Ukraine is very poor and has very persistent corruption problems, Singapore has none of that. So I think there's plenty of reason to be optimistic. But this is quite a problem, quite a pickle, as they would say. Indonesia seeks new capital investors after SoftBank exit. And when I say a capital here, they mean literally the capital. Indonesia has a new capital being constructed called Nusantara, new capital city. It is under construction, and a lot of money has been borrowed to pay for the construction of this new capital city, which is not done yet. One of the world's largest investment groups called SoftBank from Japan has decided to pull out because they've lost so much money recently that they can no longer pay for this. They've decided not to do it. Now, if you find the name SoftBank familiar, it's because they invested in companies like WeWork. They were one of the earliest investors in Alibaba, and from that they made so much money that they could take a chance on more risky investments like WeWork, that co-working space company that is doing terribly. They lost a lot of money there. So they're pulling back, and this leaves a big hole in Indonesia's plans for the new capital. Now they're going to turn to, let's see, Saudi Arabia and the UAE to fill the funding gap. Is that wise? Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Turns out that they were already hoping to win over the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but now they just would probably ask for more money from those sources rather than the smaller amount because SoftBank has pulled out. I think the interesting thing that I want to point out to you here is that Japan is, as a country, I feel that Japan is investing a lot in Indonesia. The SoftBank thing is just the latest example of that, most high-profile example of that. When I was visiting Jakarta just last year, while it was still during the pandemic, I was quite surprised by the number of Japanese grocery stores around. And not just the grocery stores, but the customers were Japanese. They're Japanese professionals working in Jakarta. Japanese housewives bringing their little kids around speaking Japanese, which is what I could tell. So Japan, it appears, has a lot of investments in Indonesia, and I don't know who needs to hear that, but it is rather interesting. If this is going on, maybe this tells us something about how Japan sees the potential of Indonesia. Very promising, presumably. Moving on to the next topic. Phase out fossil fuel fired electricity, embrace biomass energy, reads this opinion piece on the Jakarta Post. Russia-Ukraine war has caused the price of oil and other energy sources such as gas and coal to skyrocket and consequently increase the cost of electricity. So in Indonesia, they take quite seriously the topic of transitioning to renewable energy such as solar, wind, water, geothermal, and last but not least, biomass. So why is this a story? Well, it's because I don't know if people are aware, but do you know what biomass is? You might wonder, maybe some kind of, specialized, is it some kind of crop, or is it some kind, maybe some byproducts of like food production, You think it's some high-tech thing that you haven't heard of before. Not really. I mean, you could have food byproducts. I've read it somewhere, but it seems that a large part of that is just going to be wood. So we're just burning wood. Wait, look at it here. Is wood a green source of energy? Scientists are divided. Moves to designate wood as a low-carbon fuel have alarmed environmentalists, and I think deservedly so. Here, check this out. Alarm some environmental groups and divided scientists. This past February, many scientists penned a letter to Senate leaders warning that the carbon neutral label would encourage deforestation and drive up greenhouse gas emissions. About a month later, more than 100 scientists took the opposite view in a letter to EPA, said that the carbon benefits of sustainable forest biomass energy are well established. So it seems that, there are arguments on both sides. So there are people trying to figure out those starkly different perspectives. But simply put, this doesn't really make any sense to me. So if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, polluting fuels, and move to things that, do not have such an impact on the environment, why would we be considering burning plain wood, good old wood? Let's see this. Oak trees in North Carolina are heading for a UK power plant largely because of a single number, 0. That's the amount of CO2 that European power plants can claim when they emit when burning wood. It's not true, of course, and in some cases, wood burning furnaces actually puff more CO2 from their smokestacks per unit of electricity produced than those burning coal. Isn't that insane? In part, that's because wood can have a higher water content, and some of its energy goes to boiling off the water instead of going towards generation of electricity. So this sounds like an accounting, shenanigans. So when we come back to Indonesia here, embracing biomass energy, do you think that this will, turn out to be some kind of, carbon neutral, very environmentally friendly biomass? I am a little skeptical, and I think that people need to pay more attention. And that's not the only article. There are several on these here. On this blog, on the Columbia Climate School's blog or news page, okay? State of the Planet. They write, in 2010, a group of prominent scientists wrote to Congress explaining that the notion that all biomass results in 100% reduction of carbon emissions is wrong. Yeah. And it lays out the, actually detailed case saying biomass can reduce carbon dioxide if fast-growing crops are grown on otherwise unproductive land. So the land has to be unproductive and the fast-growing crops are burned, and then we continue to replace those crops that we harvested, with more crops, so that, the impact is quite minimal, because the regrowth of the plants offset the carbon produced by the combustion. So there's no question that the combustion of the plants emits carbon. So again, we are back to square one, where biomass is not all that it's cracked up to be. I mean, you understand that the other fuel sources, solar, wind, geothermal, are great, but biomass, man, this is going to be the sneaky energy source that everybody's going to have to learn about. But you heard it here first, all right? If your country, your state is considering clean energy, you need to ask some questions about biomass. Because if this is not done properly, then what happens is that, well, Java Island in Indonesia has pollution problems, air pollution problems. And if you're just replacing coal with wood, then it does absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Okay, moving on to the last item I have for you. And I really like this. US News ranked Colombia number 2, but a math professor has his doubts. So what happened was that this math professor, Michael Thaddeus, he challenged the ranking given to his own university. He has tenure at Columbia University. Columbia University happens to be ranked very nicely on the US News university ranking, but he finds it very how should I say this? He finds it very fishy. He thinks that there are, serious problems with this rankings. Now, not only is it, it's an oversimplification, right? Because universities are very multi-dimensional, right? They have history, they have different faculties. Some faculties are stronger than others. The business school here might be the best, whereas, and produce excellent leaders, while the engineering school over there may actually have had terrific alumni. And how do you translate all of that into a single number that is a ranking? It's just an impossible task. Yet, the article does a very good job to lay out the context of it, saying that you can parents will want to rely on the rankings as a simple, indicator of what they ought to give priority to. And universities can say, I don't want to support this because, it's oversimplifying. But if they don't participate, then they lose out, right? If they don't optimize for that ranking, they don't get the pick of the best students. So in principle, they can perfectly well think that this is evil. This is totally oversimplifying. This is bad for the university, bad for this, bad for students. Because rather than focus on the quality of the education, quality of research, opportunities for their faculties and students, they're optimizing for rankings, and that may be really bad, but they have no choice. It's catch-22, and Dr. Thaddeus, he's the gadfly. That's the thing that they called Socrates in Athens, saying that he was poking at the weaknesses of the institutions, teaching things that should not be taught. And let me give you an example now. Dr. Thaddeus believes that all rankings are inherently suspect. Yes, he asks, who has the power to audit the books of these organizations that make the report? It's frightening. There's almost nothing. Well, I'm pretty confident. I would be pretty confident that there's just no auditing. There's nothing. So what did Dr. Thaddeus find? Well, he found that some of the most important criteria have serious discrepancies. Class size, proportion of faculty of the highest degree in their field. And that sounds really pretty important, right? Because you want your faculty to be staffed by people with the highest degree in their field. If the highest degree in their field is the PhD, then, well, I would love to have more PhDs. Ideally award-winning, did significant research. And if it's something else, then, maybe a highly qualified doctor. I don't think regular medical doctors have PhD. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing. So let's see. Columbia claimed that 100% of its faculty had terminal degrees, the highest in their field. By looking over all 958 full-time faculty at Columbia, Thaddeus came up with 69 people whose highest degree was a bachelor or master's degree, or a degree not in the field that they were teaching. Oh, so sneaky. So he is I admire this man so much. So much. Look at him. Magnificent bastard. Colombia would surely be a lesser place without them. Agreed, right? Because they are truly remarkable. Colombia officials challenged Dr. Thaddeus by saying he's fixated on a PhD, but that in many fields like writing, that might not be the relevant degree. So, of course, I mean, yeah, perhaps. But isn't it strange? Like, how can you claim that they have their terminal degrees when there are people whose highest degree was a bachelor or master's, or it was not a degree that was not in the field they're teaching? So that feels sneaky. Like if you're getting people to teach A, but their degree is in B, and yet you report to the, for the purpose of ranking that, oh yeah, they have the highest degree, but they're not even teaching the field. That seems like very difficult to justify. Let's see. Of the top ranked universities, Columbia scored the best in the percentage of classes with under 20 students. And that sounds really good. You want to have this low student to faculty ratio. So you want to have, maybe ideally like one student to one faculty. But that's just a fantasy because it's impossible. But you want it as low as possible, right? So it says here they claim to have 20 students for each faculty. 82%. 82.5%. But by looking at the directory of classes, he calculated that the correct figure is probably between 62.7 and 66.9. Colombia officials contend that Dr. Thaddeus was relying on was not official. So note that they're so angered by him, they don't want to give him the register either. You're just going to embarrass us. We're not going to give you any data. If you want, you go and browse the website just like everybody else. That's the best we can do for you. That's hilarious. Using publicly available data, because he can't get access to the actual, Columbia data. Dr. Thaddeus had more disputes with the rankings. And this is perhaps the most this is the most egregious one. Dr. Thaddeus found Columbia's claim that it spent $3.1 billion annually on instruction on teaching was implausibly large, which it's unbelievable. Is that even a thing? Like, how do you spend $3.1 billion to teach annually? More than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. Wow. So he said that Columbia appeared to be including patient care in the spending, something he noted that New York University, for instance, does not do to its detriment in the rankings. Columbia officials essentially confirmed that point of his analysis, saying that the university educates close to 4,000 full-time equivalent students in medical fields, and that instruction and care often happen at the same time. Wow. So the university are not, they don't dispute that he's right about this, and we do this thing. They just say that, hey, sometimes people learn, and they learn, and while giving medicine, and the medicine is just incidentally, you have to calculate the medicine. That's part of the learning, right, of the student, which doesn't bear up to hold up to scrutiny at all. So much respect to Dr. Thaddeus. Terrific man. And this caught my eye because over in Singapore, there's a culture. Well, we have a culture over here. I say we because I was educated in the Singapore education system. That rankings matter a great deal. It's a national obsession. And when I find a Columbia University who ask some very sensible questions, to challenge rankings and to cast doubt on them, and to talk about how they're so incomplete. I mean, in the first place, the article describes that these are incomplete for capturing the complexity of the world. And on top of that, methodology is flawed. I feel like this should be heard by more. Like, more people should come to understand this perspective, that the rankings are not objective. They are very subjective. And maybe the less importance we place on them, the better it is for everybody. That's just my personal opinion, you know. All right, that's all the material I have prepared for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this entertain you, edify you, you know, relieve your stress, take your mind off your work troubles, just for a moment. Because you know what, you can feel good while not thinking about your troubles. Nothing has to change. Think about this. Every single day, you know, you can watch a YouTube video, or sometimes you watch a TV show or a movie, and while you're watching it, you enjoy it. You know, it's exciting or it's funny. Uh, it teaches you something. It's colorful, you know, and explosive. And for those few moments when you're watching it, you really enjoy it. You forget all about your troubles. Nothing changed about the troubles, you know, the problems you have to face in life. Just like you, just as it is for you, is as it is for me. But for those moments, you felt great, and that's what I would like to do. That's what I like to achieve. It's just like taking a break, have a laugh, you know, feel a little surprise, you know, and a bemusement at how absurd things can be, or how funny the world can be. And if I did that for you, smash the like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe. And if you have any complaints, please direct your complaints to the comments below. Praise too, if you have any. Thank you. And I'll see you again real soon. Take care. Bye bye.